And put ghosts.
But like on the bottom side, mine's total stucco, and they want to put some kind of rock trim or something. Oh, here we go. She's getting ready to start this crap. Kathy Boyce, Grid Works.
To hear firsthand from the subject matter experts at SPS on a variety of important topics for this 20-year plan. We're also going to introduce see. Let's try this. Can you hear me on Zoom? Thank you. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Well, you know where we're headed. You've seen the agenda. Again, welcome, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. We're trying to incorporate both the in-person and the Zoom folks with equal exposure and opportunity, but it's been a little challenging. So thank you for your patience in that. Anyway, you can look at the agenda, and don't worry, you'll get to explore all the 3 roundtable conversations with the subject matter experts between today and tomorrow. A couple of reminders, if you wouldn't mind, please speak up and hold your questions until our question and answer segments. We'll have very specific question and answer segments, and that'll give those in the room and those on Zoom an opportunity to raise your hand and ask questions. As you did in the first workshop, continue to be respectful in your comments, understand people are all working with good intentions, share your ideas, leave time for others. And we're going to try our best to include the virtual participants with equal participation. It may require us in the room to use our outside voices so they can hear us in your questions. But we're going to do our best. And again, please let us know. Kathy Boyce is monitoring all the virtual participation, so she can also be a resource if you're having any difficulty on Zoom. A couple reminders about Zoom. Please mute your audio when you're not speaking. When we call upon you in the question and answer and other discussions, please activate your camera. You can use the chat to provide input when we ask for that, and be willing to use the react button to raise your hand. So a couple of mechanics most folks are pretty familiar with those. So our work together is really guided by a couple of key documents. One is the New Mexico Integrated Resource Planning Rule, which gives stakeholders specific input into 3 different areas. First of all, modeling information and modeling requests that would complement what the utility is already modeling. Information into the statement of need, which is really a portion of the plan that says, utility needs to add so much resource of a certain type by a certain time. That's a statement of need that stakeholders have direct input into. And then the action plan, which is, what are the things that the utility might do in the next 3 years to implement the 20-year vision that they've presented in this IRP, in this integrated resource plan. So the rule calls for those specific places for stakeholders to have input. We have captured what we call a central question for our work together, and that is, what is SPS's resource need to meet expected demand? It's a pretty simple question, but it's a very complex answer to that. That's what the plan will describe. And remember that there are constraints, there are policy requirements, there are other things that the utility has to meet while providing these resources to meet expected demand. So this will be our central question as we go through our conversation over the next months. There are a variety of stakeholder engagement players in this process, and you can see here, we took a quote actually from the IRP rule that says the purpose of this new process, which it's new, but it was put in place in 2022, where stakeholders had an opportunity to engage in the IRP process. And the goal of that rule is to advise the public utility and reach potential agreement in the utilities development of the statement of need and action plan. So that will be the end goal we're working toward. Of course, SPS has some amazingly deep technical expertise. They are the ones that will make decisions about what goes into the plan. Then stakeholders, we have customers, we have advocates, advisors that have perspectives of what their needs are going forward, what their concerns are. GridWorks is the facilitator appointed by the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission to facilitate this stakeholder process. And then the Public Regulation Commission has a couple of roles. They have some folks from advisory staff, and I know we have at least one person here from that group. And the utility division staff also participates as analysts, reporters, and we have some folks on Zoom from that part of the PRC. So a great diverse set of perspectives in this process. What I would like to do now is just show you a quick, before we go around to introductions, show you a quick snapshot of this process that will take us to late September, because the utility is planned and has committed to filing their next 20-year plan by October 13th of this year. So our work as a stakeholder group needs to be completed before then so that it can be incorporated into the plan. We have laid out a process that's in 3 phases. Now through April is really identifying what you, the stakeholders, feel is important. Also understanding what this SPS system really looks like, what the challenges and opportunities are. We're building a foundation of knowledge that will help us in the later phases. And we have a total of 3 workshops planned, including this one that you'll see under the March-April timeframe. The second phase is really heavily focused on modeling. What is the base case that the utility is, or base cases that they're looking at? What do stakeholders want to have looked at in models that maybe is not already being looked at by the utility? So input into stakeholder requested model runs. And then we get to understand and dig into and digest the results of those models, which will inform the statement of need. So that's the second phase. We've got 3 workshops planned for that phase. And then the third phase in August through September is really where the rubber hits the road, where we'll be creating input from the stakeholders on that statement of need and action plan. So that's where we're headed. We know it's an incredible commitment of your time to engage in this process, and we greatly appreciate your insight. We also have set up a process such that those of you who really want to get down deep and detailed into modeling, your time to engage is really mostly in that second phase, the May through July. Those who are maybe looking at a bigger picture and staying at a high level, engage at the beginning and then perhaps at the end. But those of you who care about those modeling details, we'd ask you to consider participating throughout the process. But that phase 2 is really heavy into modeling and details there. So with that, before we turn the microphone over to SPS, I'd like to just ask that we do introductions. And I think we should start here in the room. I'm going to go back to this slide that kind of shows you what we're trying to do today. And what we'd like you to do is tell us a little bit about who you are, what's your name, what's your organization, and if you have a particular thing that think's important to address, please mention it. We're going to ask the SPS team to introduce themselves after we have our stakeholders introduce themselves. So we'll start with stakeholders in the room here today in Roswell, and then we'll go to stakeholders on the Zoom in the Zoom room, which Kathy will help facilitate. Then we'll come back and introduce all the team from SPS, both in the room and on the virtual platform. So with that, Jason, would you like to go first? Please use your outside voice. And if you have, please introduce yourself.
Jason,
Great. Thank you for being here.
Carrie Hatton, Contact Phillips. I'm an attorney in the Santa Fe office, and I look at policy and regulatory concerns.
Great. Thank you for being here. Let's see. I think we have Hudson, please. Great. Thank you for being here. Yes, sir.
We are also purchase power delivered to us through SPS resolution.
Great. Thank you for being here. And I think we have Andrew. Great. Thank you for making the effort. Did I miss any stakeholders in the room? All right, Kathy, let's turn to the virtual room then at this point.
And thank you for those who are coming in virtually. We understand that it's a little hard when we're going around the room. So we're just going to ask you to come on camera if you would, and we're going to run down a list quickly. Just introduce yourself, your organization, and I'm going to go alphabetical, I think, if I can get to, oh boy. Okay, I'm going to start from mine. Let's go with Adam. Adam NC, can you come on and just say hi?
Yes, how are you? Adam Enzi, Armstrong County Judge.
Welcome, thank you.
Thank you.
Agatha. I'm going through the A, so if your first name starts with an A, please get yourself ready. Agatha.
Good afternoon, everyone. Agatha Malik, New Mexico Public Regulation Commission.
Thank you. AJ. AJ Decker.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex Gedeker. I'm with 1898.
I'm sorry, say again.
I'm Alex Gedeker. I'm with 1898.
Thank you. Alex Pope.
Sorry, was that calling on me?
Alex Pope we're looking for.
Yeah, present.
You want to introduce yourself and who you're with?
Yep, sure. I am Alex Pope with 1898 and Co. We are supporting Excel's self-build team on the current 2025 all-source RFP, and kind of interested in what the region has next.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Andy Kilgore.
Yeah, Andy Kilgore here with PBX. We're a E&P based in Midland, Texas, with operations in Lee County, New Mexico.
Thank you. And Yanma?
Hi, this is Ananya Chaturvedi. I'm with the Office of Public Utility Counsel in Texas. We're consumer advocates on behalf of residential and small commercial consumers.
Welcome. Thank you. Kara, so we're moving into the C's. Kara Lynch.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kara Lynch, attorney with Coalition for Clean, Affordable Energy, representing a variety of environmental nonprofits. And I have one question regarding the schedule or the timeline of whether and when certain workshops will be held. And then our interest will be, data and modeling and being able to actively participate in that process.
Okay, thank you. Kara, we'll go through introductions here, and why don't we come to your scheduling questions just before we hand it over to SPS. So we will come back to you. Thank you. Charles.
Good afternoon. I'm Charles DeSalen with Coalition for Clean Affordable Energy. I'm working with Kara. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Claire.
Yes, good afternoon to you all. My name is Claire Burrows. I'm with the City of Clovis. Looking forward to participating in this process with you over the next couple of days and provide any input and support that we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Corey. Corey Kane. Okay, we'll keep moving. We'll come back if you are able to get back to us. So just sit tight. Sydney Beatles.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Sydney Beatles for Western Resource Advocates. We intervened in SPS's most recent and still awaiting a recommended decision generation resource case, and we raised issues, and among ours and issues raised by other interveners, SPS said, well, we wish you would have raised them in the last IRP process. So we're going to be participating and monitoring to the extent that my schedule allows. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Was that Corey maybe reaching in? Okay, we'll come back. D Sontag. So moving into the Ds.
Good afternoon. This is David Sontag from Western Farmers Electric Cooperative.
Welcome. Thank you. Darren Zygich.
Yeah, this is Darren Zigich from New Mexico Public Regulation Advocacy Staff, Utility Division.
Thank you. Zygich. Thank you, Darren. I'll get that right. Duncan.
Hi, I'm Duncan McCook with the Texas Cotton Ginners Association. We represent some member cotton gins in the state of Texas.
Thank you, Duncan. Moving on, we're going to go into the H and J's here. Heidi.
Heidi Gruner, I'm here with SPS. Just listening in.
Thank you. Okay. Jake Miller.
Hi, Jake Miller with Phillips 66 Company.
Welcome. And I see we're going to get some Excel folks in the mix here. I'm just going to keep going alphabetical so we make sure we get everyone virtually. So Jason.
Jason Rurup. I'm the manager of the Encompass modeling for SPS Xcel Energy.
Thank you. Jake Miller.
Hi, Jake Miller.
Oh, you just, sorry, we just had you. Yep,
okay.
Sorry. Jennifer.
Jennifer Grassland with the Economic Development Corporation of Lee County.
Welcome. Justin.
Good afternoon, Justin Holwalt, City Manager for the City of Clovis.
Kathy? Kathy?
Hi, it's Katie. Katie Lang, Utility Division Attorney, Staff Attorney for the New Mexico PRC.
Thank you. Welcome. Larry. Senator Scott.
Larry Scott, State Senator from District 42, Lee, Eddy, and Chaves counties.
Welcome. Thank you. Letty?
Letty with Excel.
Welcome. Martina.
Martina Sidler, I'm with Target Resources.
Thank you. Michael Martinez.
Good afternoon, Michael Martinez with the Office of Public Utility Council in Texas.
Welcome. Michael McMillan.
Hi, Michael McMillan, outside counsel for Occidental Petroleum.
Thank you. Welcome. Mike D'Antonio.
Good afternoon, Mike D'Antonio with Xcel Energy, working in Santa Fe regulatory and legislative issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Orland.
Hi, yes, this is Orland Whitney with the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission Utility Division staff.
And I just wanted to make kind of maybe a longer comment here, but in case 00066, the commission identified concerns regarding long-lived thermal assets and including those misalignments with New Mexico's zero carbon requirements and the risk of stranded costs. So I echo Darren Zigich's concerns for this IRP. Staff is really interested in stranded costs and interested in how SPS is addressing those issues within its planning framework. So, specifically how asset life assumptions and early retirement risk and cost recovery under those binding modeling constraints are modeled and how those risks are quantitatively reflected in portfolio selection and resulting customer cost impacts. That's what we're interested in.
Thank you, Orland. Appreciate it. Naomi, sorry, did I jump over you?
That's okay. Good afternoon, Naomi Velasquez with New Mexico Public Regulation Commission.
Thank you. Raylyn?
Good afternoon, Raylyn with Xcel Energy, Community Relations in Lee and Eddy County.
Thank you. Next one is Rice. I suspect that's a last name. Rice J? Ah, sure. Thank you. Good. Okay. Thank you, Jason. Rick Arnett.
Hello, Rick Arnett, attorney on behalf of New Mexico Large Customer Group. We are a coalition of large energy consumers in SPS's service territory.
Welcome. Thank you. Sarah Hogan.
Hi, this is Sarah Hogan with 1898 & Co. Consulting Company.
Thank you. Shelby.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shelby Abel, and I am with Xcel, SPS.
Great. Thank you. I think next one is also SPS. Shirin? Shirin?
Hello, everyone. This is Shirin Couples. I'm with the SPS Resource Planning.
Welcome. Stephanie.
Stephanie Ahmedich. I'm with Xcel Energy SPS supporting new generation projects.
Welcome. Thank you. Sydney.
Hi, everyone. My name's Sydney Henry. I'm with Google, and I work on our Western energy policy and legislative matters.
Welcome. Thank you. Timothy. There he is, Timothy. I'm not sure we're hearing you. All right, Timothy, we'll come back to you. And believe it or not, our last one in the list here is Tyler.
Hey, my name's Tyler Fletcher. I'm supporting Grid United. We are an HVDC interregional transmission developer. We are interested in seeing connections to nearby markets modeled, as we think some of these connections will promote reliability and affordability for the SPS system.
Thank you, Tyler. Okay, I am sure there may have been one or two in here that I didn't get. So if you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself virtually, if you would turn your camera on and we'll just recognize you in the room. Mark?
Hi, Mark Walker, outside counsel for Targa Resources.
It's separate. Welcome. Kelly?
Kelly Green, also with Texas Cotton Gin Association.
Great. Welcome. Anybody else that we didn't get virtually?
Hey, this is Michael Palm with Chevron.
Great. Good to see you. Welcome. Okay, and we are doing our best to do a hybrid. Sorry, Jack, go ahead.
I'm with the NMPRC here in Albuquerque.
Great, welcome. Any others in the virtual? Okay, so just to let the virtual folks know, we are trying our best to do a hybrid setting here. We know that the discussions in the room are a little bit difficult for the people virtually to hear. We're going to break out this afternoon, so we make sure we capture that, but we are doing our best to manage both platforms. So thank you. And I'll hand it back to Margie. Thank you, Kathy. So I think before we have the SPS team come up and do the presentation, they're also going to introduce the rest of the folks in the room. We wanted to get back to Kara and your question about timeline. So Kara, let me put the slide back up that I think maybe you have questions about, and have Kara go ahead and come off mute and ask your question. Is this the slide you were referring to?
Yes. So, will you be providing agendas ahead of time, or what will that look like? And this timeline will be posted on the GridWorks website, correct?
Yes, it's incorporated in the slide deck, and tomorrow we have another slide that gives some more details, at least for the April time, the April workshop time. So materials will be continuously updated on the GridWorks website. This schedule and the exact agenda topics, you will see that in one of my slides here, although what we recognize is that both the stakeholders' needs and the utilities' needs evolve throughout this process. So although we have an outline for what topics will be described at which workshop, you'll see that tomorrow on my slide number 21, that's also loaded in the GridWorks website. Those are the topics that we're intending to cover in those workshops. But as I mentioned, the very specific agendas will not be released until several days before the workshop, and they could adjust a little bit depending on what the stakeholders and the utility need in this process. So Kara, is that helpful with your question?
Yeah, we're just working with others and want to be able to communicate, you know, the topics that will be covered.
Fabulous. I refer you to slide 21, which we'll cover tomorrow, but it's in the deck that's loaded, so you can see a bit more information that we have evolved, at least at this point. And we will work hard in conjunction with the SPS team to get materials and agendas out before the workshops, but I can't guarantee that they would be available more than, say, a week before, and sometimes even less than that. But you'll see the main topics that we have envisioned for the workshops on slide 21 for today, for tomorrow, actually.
Thanks, Margie. Appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, you're very welcome. Any other questions about where we're headed? Okay, with that, Jared, let me turn the podium over to you. Jared Cooley with Southwestern Public Service to introduce the SPS team. And let me get your slides changed here, Jared, and give you the mic as close as you can to your mouth would be great. Here's your tether.
Thank you.
Let me, take this to so
Awesome. Thank you, Margie. Thank you, Kathy, for walking us through the introductions for everybody. I'm Jared Cooley. I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Planning for SPS. And so going to do a little bit of foundational stuff, talking about some of the SPS folks that we have here in the room. And then we'll introduce and kick off some of our later topics. I do want to thank the New Mexico Military Institute for hosting us today, allowing us to use this space for this stakeholder meeting. First things first, I'll just work on an introduction of those in the room. We're not going to bring everybody up on the camera, but for those of you in the room, just raise your hand up when I say your name so those who are in the room can put a name with the face. And so within the room, we have Zoe Elise, our Regional Vice President of Planning and Policy, Justin Gable, our Director of Resource Planning. He will be actually next up speaking through a number of resource planning topics for us today. We have Linda Hudgens, who's our Regulatory Policy Specialist, really keeping us together as we work through the IRP. She's really our SME behind the scenes, pulling this all together on the SPS side. We have two of our forecasting leads, John Goodenough, our director, and Travis Whalen, the manager. They'll also be covering some slides today, as well as one of the breakout sessions, really focused in on load forecasting. We have Thaddeus Wilford, part of the resource planning team, Joseph Koski with our demand response side, Taylor Moot also helping us out today. They will be helping on one of our other breakout sessions along with Sean White, talking about our Director of Customer Strategy, really talking about some of the customer side aspects of our system. So we think about, we have the demand, or we have the resource side with generators. We also have the customer side, the customer solution side. And that'll be part of our breakout sessions, whether it's today or tomorrow, that the people in the room or virtual individuals be able to participate in them. So the goal for SPS was to bring a number of our subject matter experts covering a wide variety of topics, allowing this kind of back and forth with the stakeholders to dig into some of the really important topics that were brought up first at the first workshop, but as Orlin actually alluded to, has been brought up in other avenues, whether it's through the commission or stakeholder processes or workshops or rulemakings. A lot of the topics that come up during the IRP process are topics that are just really pertinent to the industry today. There's a lot of questions, a lot of differences between different utilities. And so venues like this allow SPS our opportunity to kind of highlight why we do what we do, but also to engage and learn along the way. And so with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Justin Gable to walk us through the integrated resource planning topics that we have today.
That's my thing. Thanks, sir. All right, so thank you everybody for being here today and all the people online as well. I'm Justin Gable, the Director of Resource Planning at SPS. So my job really entails finding a solution or planning a solution for the next 20 years in this IRP process. What resources can meet our growing demand from load forecasting. So if you can you follow the next slide, or is it me?
Right here. This
it's the clicker.
little device is
Thank you. I forgot about that.
good. Yep, there you go.
All right. So on our first stakeholder meeting, I presented this slide. I didn't have a lot of chance to talk about it. So I do feel like that this is really summarizes some of the issues and things that we need to be discussing in this 26 IRP. More than happy to discuss other items that other individuals may feel to bring up, but I would think that in general, most all topics that we'll be talking about can generally fit in these 4 buckets. Starting from the left to the right, talk about the resources. If you look at our L&R tables, which I'm sure we'll have plenty of discussions about, we have a number of both retiring generation and also expiring PPAs from the 2030s. You can see right here, and this is just a snapshot of like the first half of 2030, but there's also resource retirements and PPA expirations between 2035 and 40. Some of the more notable ones, though, are The Nichols one, Quake County Thermal, that's dispatchable generation. You can also see in the expiring PPA section, you see the Hobbs Lee County CC. That's a 604 megawatt thermal resource as well as retiring. So we have a number of thermal dispatchable generation that is either retiring or expiring that needs to be addressed. In addition, you can see that there's a number of expiring PPAs that are wind and a little bit of solar. Those are also need to be addressed for both reliability, energy, but also for RPS requirements. So the RPS standard is the Renewable Portfolio Standard in New Mexico, and that determines the percentage of New Mexico sales that are met by renewable energy. Through time, all the way to 2045, there is an increasing percentage required of renewables to meet New Mexico load. So all these expiring PPAs, if they expire and they're not necessarily replaced, that represents a backsliding in our capability of serving New Mexico customers with renewable energy. So very important component that we need to be considering in this IRP process. And this is just the first half of the 2030s. There are more retirements and expirations after that. There's also a number of variables that are still out there to be discussed. One of those being the 24 RFP resource approvals. Several gigawatts of resources are currently seeking approval in both Texas and New Mexico. We don't have final decisions on those at this point, but that is an incredibly important data point that will influence our modeling during the IRP process. Other important components that we need to be considering are both the generic resource assumptions, that's both pricing, accreditation values of both ELCC, effective load carrying capabilities of renewables like wind and solar, as well as battery storage, performance-based accreditation for thermal resources. Other RTOs, other utilities, they may use a different accreditation for thermals, like ELCC. SPP, Southwest Power Pool, utilizes performance-based accreditation, which is a historic look back on performance of thermal resources, and utilizes the last 7 years of both summer performance and winter performance to be able to determine an accredited capacity value for those resources. So those generic resource assumptions in PBA, ELCC for both existing and future resources is incredibly important into how SPS will solution its future needs. I would also say, though, that those are focused specifically on capacity value. And that's a major component. It's a very simplified component for SPS to understand our loads and resources table and understand if we have enough resources to meet peak demand. But it's not necessarily the whole story. SPS is required to service customers on 8,760 hours a year, every hour of the year. So all resources have characteristics besides just their firm capacity value that ultimately influence resource selection. Cost to customers, the specific technology's ability to fill specific needs on the system, especially as we move forward with a more diverse portfolio of resource types. We find a lot of synergy between different resource types. As you can see in our 24 RFP, we had all technology types represented. We brought forth both thermal generation, renewable resources, battery resources. All technology types are represented in that portfolio. And so as we go through time, you'll start seeing that more often, that there's not one specific solution that can solve all needs. It is a portfolio of resources that can meet a system-wide need. So I know I'm taking a lot of time, so try to speed up a little bit. We have some folks here, Travis, John, talking specifically about loads, but there's very specific challenges associated with loads. Significant load growth across the entire United States right now, both for traditional industrial customers like oil and gas, and also for high impact loads like data centers. What does it look like to add 1 gigawatt data center into your service territory? That's a fundamental shift in how we have been traditionally adding load to our system. So it requires discrete consideration and understanding of how those types of loads being added to the system are ultimately going to impact all customers and SPS's ability to service all customers. On opportunities, we talked about demand response and large load growth and generation discussion, but thinking about what opportunities we have in our current system to be able to mitigate need for additional resources. Demand response is a great example of that. There is a an inherent role that demand response can fit inside of a resource portfolio, just like a thermal resource or just like a wind or solar or battery resource. So as time goes on, and this is some more conversation we'll have with when we talk about our SPP policy discussions, how do we really accredit demand response? Should it really be considered 100% capacity value? So for every 1 megawatt of demand response, does that really equate to a one megawatt reduction on your peak demand or not? So there's lots of discussions at Southwest Power Pool on exactly what demand response can fit in when you're serving customers. It's a particularly interesting challenge for SPS because we have such a high load factor for our customers, being a heavily industrial base. We also got two more components over here: reliability. Those are the things that we've kind of already talked about: ELCC accreditation, performance-based accreditation, understanding the LOLE study and how it influences the PRM. That is not necessarily a value that is just always up and to the right. Over time, what we are currently seeing is that there's a potential in the early part of the 2030s where that PRM may actually see a reduction. It's not a significant reduction of 10, 20%, but we're seeing reductions in the PRM value in the 2030s at SPP right now that are ultimately influenced by the resources that SPS members are proposing during that time period. So there's a lot of effects upon resource selections and what we are planning for that can affect different parts of our planning process.
Justin, can I interrupt you? PRM, for those who are new to this process.
Yes, sorry about that. At the planning. PRM is the planning reserve margin. Any utility that is planning, any prudent utility is planning for resources above what it needs to meet its.
I can see. Got it. There's some interference.
That's okay. Any utility is going to be planning for a certain amount of resources to exceed its actual peak demand. That's to take into consideration anything like forced outages, extreme weather events, load forecasting. There's lots of reasons why you'd want to plan for an amount of resources above your actual peak demand. So planning reserve margin. Currently today, we have two PRM. We have a summer PRM and a winter PRM. The winter PRM is a new introduction since the last IRP in 2023. The winter PRM right now is set to 36%. Up until the 2029 period, it's going up from 36 to about 38%, but we are seeing some small reductions past that. So we can have a much more detailed conversations about where the PRM is going and ultimately resource accreditations in some of our breakout sessions. Some other considerations that are really important is also what we call the DICES study. I might need Jared Cooley to define that term. DICES always gets me. Definitive integrate, or it's a process that basically determines the cost, the transmission network upgrade cost for generators connecting to the transmission system. That process can be lengthy at times. And ultimately, it's a lengthy process, and it also has a financial component to it to connect your generators. That process has an effect on resource selections that SPS can produce in an RFP. If a resource isn't in the DICES study, it presents a lag in time for when that resource can actually come online. On the other side of that process, there's also the SPP AQ study process. The AQ study process is the side of that SPS or the SPP studies to bring new loads onto the system. So both of these components are related to SPS's planning process, but they're not wholly within SPS's ability to control. Oh my gosh, 5 minutes. So we're going to go through this a little bit.
So for folks in the room, Ronnie Walker is struggling to get in, so we might see this a couple of times. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Point your clicker right here.
Am I going to change? All right, so I got a couple of slides on here just to kind of give you a general idea of where pricing information is going. So this right here, just talking general natural gas price forecast. This can ultimately affect thermal resource selections in the IRP and also RFP processes. General note here, up and to the right. That's where prices are generally being forecasted to go right now. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Try clicking one more time. Yeah. So this is also our market price forecast. So this is our price forecast for the SPP market. Again, upward and to the right. Not necessarily important to know the exact values here, just the general trend of where this information is going. So let's go to the next one. This one I do think is pretty important. So this is our generic resource pricing. We currently have some expectations on our generic resources for both solar and wind here. You can see though that in the 2030s, that's when we're modeling a change in PTCs and eligibility. PTCs being production tax credits. Those are expiring, and when we see those expire, we're seeing price assumptions increase. So right now we are utilizing for our generic resource pricing, we're using a third party called Trio. That's where we're getting our base initial starting, like our seed data. And then we're using the NREL ATB data to provide escalation values over time. So just to give everybody a general idea of where that's going. All right, this is for the batteries. General same trend, upward to the right, not quite as much, fairly stable. But you can see we have 3 different values here, 4, 6, and 8 hour. So those are generally, as the duration of the battery increases, the pricing is going up. So we'll keep on moving because I only have a little bit of time here. The other important component is SPS's Encompass topology. Encompass is our production costing model and our expansion modeling software that we utilize. We have a topology that represents the SPS system inside the model. What we generally have is 3 load area bubbles represented by the orange. On SPS North, Northern Texas Panhandle, SPS South, general, Texas Plains, Tolka area, Lubbock, that area, and then we got Southeast New Mexico, which on this map, you would say, why is that not the West? It's Southeast because it is Southeast New Mexico. That's generally what our topology is for our load. And then you can see the green and blue bubbles represent our connection to the SPP market. You're going to see a bubble to the top left that has SPS new generation. So when we are adding generic resources to the model, it's going to see needs across the SPS topology. And so this is part of some of the important components of resource selections in the modeling. ELCC accreditation, its firm capacity value of a resource, may have an effect on model selection, but area is also important. Where do we see load growth in this area? What kind of load growth is that? Is it a high load factor load that's coming on? Is it in Southeast New Mexico? You're going to see generic resources from the new generation bubble being built to service that area. And because the topology has transmission constraints between these areas, you may see different resource selections based upon the load types that are inside of those areas. Another kind of an interesting component over here on the bottom right, and this is something we get more discussion about, is what do we model these transmission constraints between our load area bubbles over time? And we have lots of transmission projects in the pipeline. CHR that's coming on December 26th. That's the Crossroad Hobbs Roadrunner line that's going into Southeast New Mexico. We've also got a 765 line that's going to be built in the 2030s. And those additions and modifications to our transmission topology, we do incorporate in the model. So there's a time series component to transmission topology in the model. So there's lots of things that can be influencing resource selections besides just ELCC, besides performance-based accreditation, and besides even pricing information. Topology also matters. Go to the next slide, please. I know that we're running out of time. So this is performance-based accreditation. This is a snapshot of what generic resources for traditional thermal resources are getting in the SPS system. So the gray numbers are historic information for generic technologies, and the blue is actual forced outage rates that impact our calculation. We are currently moving into performance-based accreditation. So as time moves on, we will use more actual data over time. But in this interim period, while we are not fully into the 7 years of performance-based accreditation, there is generic information or system-wide average information that's incorporated for the last 4 years, I think, at this point. And it will move more through time. You'll have more actual data. So definitely something we'll get into. All right, ELCC. These are general ELCCs that we are utilizing in the model today. Something I want to have conversations with folks about. I mean, there's the ELCC is the effective load carrying capability of a resource type. There's a seasonal component to that. A solar resource has an ability to be dependable differently in both summer and winter. If your peak demand is aligning in summer with 5 o'clock, that's when solar resources are able to provide most of their capacity. So you see a higher accreditation for summer for a solar resource. In the winter, that same period of time you're not going to be able to have that same level of dependency on that resource to be able to meet peak demand. So when you select resources like solar, you can see a very large discrepancy between what that resource can contribute in the summer and winter. And you can see, depending upon resource overall makeup of a system, you may have to build more resources in winter to be able to meet that demand, even though that is not necessarily your peak demand for the year round. So we'll move on to the next slide real quick. So this is the ELCC for winter. The other thing that you can kind of see here, 4-hour storage. We have a pretty heavily declining ELCC for battery storage. An interesting component to this is ELCC for batteries can be highly affected by both hydro dispatch on the SPP system and also by demand response programs on the SPP system. In the last ELCC study, I'm talking to this like it's a mic, sorry guys. But in the last ELCC study, demand response in hydro was removed, and we saw a higher level of accreditation for batteries. That is an individual year's study assumptions, and they can very easily be switched. And if those demand response and hydro dispatchers are added back, you would see ELCC being further reduced again. So when you are planning a system and a ELCC value can change drastically between study years, that is something that is worth a discussion on whether you are more conservative with resource accreditation or more liberal with your understanding where accreditation is going to go. The difference being that if you assume a lower accreditation value, you will end up having to select more resources to meet your peak demand. But if you are under forecast, or if you are over forecasted, you will have resources to meet it. The opposite situation, if you estimate your ELCC accreditation and ultimately performs worse, you have now brought on load that you're not able to meet with the resources that you currently have selected. So worth a conversation, I think, for us in our breakout sessions. Yeah, so this is this last slide is our SPS load and resources table. You can see that by 2032, we have a very large need. We currently have an RFP on the streets right now, so we can't discuss our current RFP results or where they're ultimately going, but it is a factor in the IRP and where we ultimately will go for resource selection. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have time for questions now. So of anything that you've heard so far, please feel free to raise your hand in the room or raise your hand in the Zoom room. And let's take 15 minutes worth of questions before we move on, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I apologize for not having gotten to emerging technology. We can get that more in the breakout room, but definitely
Okay.
something we want to talk about as well.
Okay, questions. And if we don't have questions, we'll have you continue here. But Kathy, anything showing up in the Zoom hands? Sydney. Yeah, Sydney, please go ahead.
Is the audio okay?
Yes.
So I believe you mentioned that battery costs were increasing, and I guess I want to know, like, are you referring to the capital cost? And also, is that as opposed to other technologies or other types of resources? Because it's my understanding that generally all costs are increasing.
I would agree with you. Generally, all costs are increasing. We are currently working on getting our generic costing assumptions for thermal generation. We don't have that ready to present yet, but in general, yes, cost for generic resources is going up over time.
Great. Thanks,
Okay,
Sydney. Tyler.
that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Sydney. Tyler.
Thank you. This is Tyler Fletcher from Grid United. I think you mentioned the PRM. You forecast how the PRM might change over time and that it potentially might decrease. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how the PRM evolution is analyzed.
Yes. So the PRM is a function of the LOLE study. The LOLE study is performed by SPP, Southwest Power Pool. They've actually had that on a staggered timeline. But the most recent LOLE study is projecting about a 1% to 2% decrease in the PRM in the 2030s. Partially that is a function of resources that are being proposed by utilities and SPP members. So as those resource assumptions become more certain and are no longer generic resources, that PRM will likely move. But right now, SPP's study timelines is that it's giving us an informational PRM in the early 2030s. And so it's not setting the PRM, but it's giving utilities and other planning folks an expectation of where that PRM is going to go.
Okay. Thank you, Justin.
Great. Looks like we have two more questions so far. Hands up first, Kara Lynch, and then Sydney Henry. So Kara, please go ahead.
Thank you. It's my understanding that only certain resources are dispatchable resources. I was wondering from SPS's perspective, what technologies do you consider dispatchable resources?
Thank you, Ms. Lynch. Dispatchable resources, I mean, general thermal technologies, obviously, battery technologies. It's not necessarily the 4, 6, and 8 hour batteries that we currently have today. That's also long-term storage, geothermal, nuclear. Those are all resource types that are assumed to be dispatchable. It's probably more at this stage. It's easier to define dispatchable versus non-dispatchable on what is non-dispatchable, which is wind and solar today.
So, yeah, come up here. Yeah. So, Kara, I think a more generic definition of that is a dispatchable resource is a resource that you can call on at any time of the day, at any time of the year.
Yes, and there are various technologies based. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your name. The gentleman that's on the screen.
My name is Justin Gable.
Oh, Justin. Thank you, Justin. And thank you, Zoe.
Great, thank you. And I think Sydney Henry, I don't see your hand still up, but go ahead, Sydney Henry. Do you still have a question?
Yep. Just one question. That was about the PRM, but about the ELCC, just about how the ELCC metric that SPS uses, how that aligns with that of SPP, and how you see that moving in the next 3 to 5 years as well.
Yes, so the ELCC values that we have, we utilize the SPP studies as a starting point, and then SPP projects ELCC accreditation based upon penetration. So as the technology type ratio changes, so if you were to add more batteries as relative to other technology types, or more wind resources as based upon other technology types, that represents more penetration of that technology on your system. So as that changes and increases over time for a specific technology type, then the accreditation of that resource goes down. And today in the ELCC studies, we have battery storage, wind, solar. Thermal generation does not have an ELCC accreditation in the SPP system. Does that get your answer?
Okay, that again, battery doesn't have an ELCC accreditation.
Thermal.
Thermal.
Did I say that wrong? I apologize.
Perfect. Thank you.
Henry, was there more?
Great, thank you. So we can come back to some of the other slides in the breakout sessions if we need to in the roundtable. But I think now we're going to switch over to John to describe some more about load forecasting. So, John, please, I will get your slide deck. Thank you.
All right, hopefully everybody can hear me okay. My name is John Goodenough. I'm the Director of Sales, Energy, and Demand Forecasting for Xcel Energy. Talk a little bit about the forecast that we'll be developing for this IRP, and I figured a good place to start is with what goes into a load forecast. So the kind of we have what we call our base forecasting, and then the adjustments that we make to the forecast. So our base forecasting, for those who've been in the utility business for a while, will look pretty similar. It's largely regression-based or trend-based forecasting. You have things like historical sales data, economic drivers like population growth, employment, gross metro product, and weather data that feeds into our kind of underlying, typical growth forecasting. And that's the first section here up on the top left, going into the sales models. Once we get those models run, we do make adjustments. We make adjustments for electric vehicles. We make adjustments for distributed generation, or PV. Well, PV is what we're adjusting for, and then DSM, and then particularly in SPS and becoming a more and more important adjustment to our modeling is our large load forecast. So the ramp up that we've seen, the increase we've seen in large load requests is becoming really the primary driver of the growth in the system. One of the other concepts that we do is we're actually creating 8760 forecasts. So hourly forecasts for every hour of the year going out the next 30 years. And those are particularly important because they're changing, right? We're adding very large, typically flat loads to what is admittedly an already pretty flat system. And then, the impact of like EV charging, the impact of solar, it's just more interesting and more informative to assess that on an hourly level. We can move on.
John, can I ask you to just elaborate a little bit when you say a large flat system? How is SPS a little different from some of the other utilities?
Sure, and I do have, I think, a little bit of information on this later. So if I don't hit it there,
come back.
All right. We talk a lot about the growth that we're expecting. We've already seen that start to happen in SPS. We had an average sales growth rate for SPS on the retail basis. I call it flattish, 1% growth from 2012 through 2017. Since 2017, we've seen an average of 4% growth. If you drill down to the state level, I don't have that in the slide here, but New Mexico has seen double-digit growth over that time, and Texas has, started to pick up. The growth in Texas has started to pick up. Similar story on the peak demand side, retail peak demand side. We've seen flat load, and then pretty significant increase since 2017. So that's sort of a backdrop for the forecast that will produce and that we'll see here in the next couple slides of just this rapid growth that we're experiencing and expect to continue to experience in the future. So looking at the planning forecast and how the way that we were developing the forecast has evolved over time. The first thing I want to do is mention that a lot of the material I'll cover here, you'll see that it's labeled 2025 V2. That's our most recent forecast that we've developed. It was in the summer of last year. It is not the IRP forecast. We are currently in development of the IRP forecast, but expect to bring a lot of the trends and the modeling changes that we incorporated into V2 into that forecast. So it's informative, but not the exact numbers that you should expect to see. If you flash back to the last IRP, the 2023 IRP, that's the blue line on this graph. And in that forecast, it is the planning forecast from that IRP. We did traditional probabilistic modeling. So we would just run simulations on potential load growth, pick the 85th percentile. That's our planning forecast. What that didn't capture and why we've started to adjust the forecast is just the rapid increase in load demands that we've had. We have a lot of requests that would far exceed the kind of the growth that was suggested in that planning forecast that are on the 2, 3, 5-year time horizon. So starting with the 24 RFP, the way we modeled the near-term growth is to bring in explicitly load requests. So you see that you get a lot more near-term growth before it starts to kind of not flatten, but level out more kind of parallel to that blue line. So we would bring in over the course of the first 3 to 5 years, specific load requests that we deem, very likely to connect. And then we would have probabilistic modeling out beyond that to capture further growth, that's based on requests that we don't quite have yet. The other thing you'll notice here is a shift from the gold or the brown line to the red line. And that's the other thing that we started to incorporate is the timing of constraints. So resource constraints and transmission constraints are more and more a part of the conversation when we're forecasting load. We're trying to build those in to create a load forecast that represents both the demand from our customers and load that we think we can serve if we resolve these constraints. Looking at the 2025 V2 forecast, we incorporated similar delays that we had in the 25 RFP. You see that there is more rapid growth or continued growth beyond where you see that in the 25 RFP. That is due to a change in the way we're modeling our probabilistic load to be not just based on system demand, but based on large commercial demand, which is the driver of the growth. So we think it's more appropriate to capture kind of the uncertainty and the potential growth in that class specifically as we develop our probabilistic model. And move on. Talked a little bit about the flatness of the system now and how the large loads that we're bringing onto the system are relatively flat as well. The reason that I call our system flat, we have a very high load factor currently. It's about 70% right now. Yes, 70% right now, which is much higher than you typically see in the industry. And that's because our loads generally aren't peaky. They're generally on, most of the time. A lot of our loads are pretty much 24/7. So we're a high industrial base and a high flat load base, and that's why our load factor as it exists is currently high. What we're putting on top of that though is even flatter load. So we have oil and gas loads and data center loads as our primary large load adjustments, and those are in the 80 to 90% range. So we expect to see that load factor creep up over time to about 85% by 2035. Again, in the V2 forecast, we'll see slightly different numbers in the 26 IRP forecast. Along with that, and this touches on what Justin was mentioning earlier with the PRM, we do have the winter loads are pretty darn close to the summer loads, which isn't necessarily the typical utility system that you see. So we have winter loads that are currently about 85% of our summer load. As we bring on this flatter load, we expect it to be 92% by 2035. Okay. I talked a little bit about the load requests and how they're driving the growth. And what I want this slide to touch on is the way that we assess those requests and take what is potentially a conservative approach to bringing those loads into the forecast. So there are multiple criteria that our key account manager team uses in order to, deem that a load is likely to connect. It's not just based on all the conversations that they've had with customers. They're applying a set of criteria to the load request that they get in order to deem it kind of warranting inclusion in the forecast. What we see here is the kind of the top line, the orange and the blue bars sum up to our total requests. The orange is what we're including in the forecast after we put in those. Okay. After we apply those criteria, and then you see that it's less than half of the load requests are being included in the forecast. The black line is how that ultimately hits our system peak demand. So that tracks the orange line pretty well. We do incorporate some delays and potentially extended ramps, those kinds of things, which pushes that black line to the right a little bit from those orange requests. I think that's all I've got.
And we have time for questions. The load forecast is a really important part of this equation. So yes, please go ahead.
Sure.
Sorry, John, can you repeat that? Yeah, repeat the question.
Oh, yes. On the prior slide, there were a couple bullets about oil and gas forecasted. If I could expand on that. So we're getting significant requests from our oil and gas customers, both for just expansion of their businesses as well as electrification of existing processes. That drives up a significant portion of our load requests and the load growth, primarily in Southeast New Mexico. And that load tends to be quite flat.
Was there something else specific you wanted to follow up on?
Increase, just hoping for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen.
Go ahead and repeat her.
I'm sorry.
Part of the question. Go ahead. Good. Repeat.
So just a more detail on the trends that we've been seeing and what we're forecasting. Sure. So I mentioned earlier that we've seen double-digit growth in New Mexico over the historical time frame. That is driven by the oil and gas growth. So we are seeing significant growth in the oil and gas, and we're expecting that to pick up and increase over time. I don't know if I have like a specific number to share or something. So okay.
But that's something you can explore in the breakout on load and forecast. Yes. So.
Sure. I'll repeat it. So not only have we seen a significant uptick in growth, we've seen a significant increase in the requests that are driving that growth, and that the scale of the requests that we see now are about 4 times what they have been historically. Yes.
Can you explain if the forecast of this large includes delays in bringing that load on because of the available capacity?
It does. Okay. The question was whether the forecasted load increases we hear incorporate delays, and they do. So as I mentioned, beginning with the 25 RFP, and we're still continuing to do this, we are accounting for both resource constraints and transmission constraints in developing the load forecast. So really trying to portray an accurate picture of our customer demand and what we can serve.
I see. Yes, Senator Scott, would you like to ask your question, please? Go ahead. Senator Scott, we're not hearing you or seeing you. Would you like to ask your question? Please go ahead.
Okay. It's my understanding that the delays for new interconnects in Southeast New Mexico are running out to 3 years. It appears as though from that last chart that you showed us that you are projecting those delays to get worse. Is that accurate?
So we do have, I think Jared Cooley may be better suited to address some of those questions, and he's up after me. I will give you a sense of the timing of the delays that we have in the forecast. So we have the transmission delays being resolved in 2031 currently in our forecast.
John, that's actually there's multiple stages of that's but some of the transmission or the transmission constraint resolution that happens before that essentially inputs that
Okay, just mentioning that there are sort of phased approach to the transmission constraints, but the earlier resolution of the constraints incorporates loads that have already been approved or in the forecast. Yeah.
Other questions for John now before you have also more chances a bit later on today to explore the load forecast in more detail. Great, John, thank you so much for being here and for your presentation. I think Justin
return to emerging technology.
Gotcha. Okay. So we're going to return to Justin and the slides on emerging technologies. So those of you who are following the slide presentation online, we're going to go back to slide number 15. So please go ahead, Justin. Thank you.
All right, so glad to be back. I've been given a little bit more time because there's some other components that we felt like was of value to bring up today. So we'll delay some of the conversation that Jared Cooley was going to wrap up probably at a later time. So we do plan on expecting to model and make available for the model to select emerging tech. There's a number of the emerging tech that was as a result of our RFI. The RFI was a request for information that SPS issued as a result of the 23 IRP. So we got a number of responses back on there. The column on the far right, that's where you can see the RFI responses. But here are a number of technologies that we're looking to consider inside of this model that could ultimately benefit SPS. Obviously, long duration energy storage. Those are storage type resources that are ultimately longer than 8 hours. Some cases up to 100 hours. So that's a technology that we want to incorporate in the model for selection. We've developed some generic pricing information for that technology. Look to include that in our modeling. Also, green hydrogen, which would basically be like a fuel conversion. We didn't see RFI responses on that, but it is something that we are looking to incorporate in the model. We have this next slide, labeled as base load carbon-free technologies. In general, I like to get away from the term baseload. It's kind of a term that kind of goes back to a time where we had, a coal fleet that was a base load, and then we'd have natural gas and other types of resources on top of that. But these would most generally fit into that same paradigm historically. So geothermal, something that has, has a very steady base technology, looking to incorporate that in the model. Some of the particular challenges with geothermal is that SPS's territory doesn't necessarily line up with those geothermal resources today. So it's still something that we want to investigate, opportunities for ultimately incorporating that in our model, as well as advanced nuclear. We're seeing that as an opportunity. Problems with that, obviously, long lead times for construction for those types of resources. The IRP process is generally a 20-year planning horizon, and what we see with nuclear is that it's kind of on the verge of not being able to meet that 20-year period. So other emerging technologies, carbon capture, obviously that is a technology that is out there that we want to incorporate. We did receive some RFI responses. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide real quick. So this slide right here kind of gives us an idea of the different technology types that were on the last slide and where we see that their adoption readiness is. The dotted line that you see vertically across there at the very first dotted line, ready for RFP. So we're assuming that which technologies are actually something that we could be expecting in an RFP coming soon. Fuel cell technology is a very well mature technology, and we believe that it's ready for RFPs. That's something that we could be seeing in RFPs today, as well as long duration storage. Geothermal, although it has specific challenges in the SPS territory, we do believe that it is a technology that is sufficiently mature enough to be bid into an RFP. Advanced nuclear is just now starting to get into that timeline where it's possible to get into an RFP. You can also see that the estimated commercial availability would be the late 2030s. If you've been following along with SPS in our last CCN filings, which was a result of the 24 RFP, the current 25 RFP, the 24 RFP said a statement from the statement of need. We identified year 2027 to 2030 as our need period for resource selection. In the 25 RFP, we set up the need for 2030 to 2032. This advanced nuclear technology, late 2030s, it's on that verge of being able to be in the next RFP as a result of this current IRP or not. Not saying that it is going to be bid into the RFP, but it is available. It's sufficiently becoming mature enough to be bid into an RFP. Carbon capture. Those are obviously, carbon capture and hydrogen are not estimated to be sufficiently mature enough to be bid into an RFP with commercial dates well past 2040. Go to the next slide. Well, I'll pause. Should I pause there between those, or should I just go ahead and keep on scrolling?
Keep going.
Okay,
And then
let's
we
go
can
ahead.
take some questions.
Right. Demand side and distribution resources. All right, so what is demand response? Demand response programs, provide incentives to customers to reduce their electrical demand. This allows customers to get a bill credit as an incentive. It also helps SPS potentially avoid the cost of a new resource selection. We do have experts in our room that can speak, to any specific program or to these technologies. So, if we have any specific questions, we'll be more than happy to bring those SMEs in the conversation. Next slide, please. All right, so this right here is the current portfolio of demand response programs. We have an interruptible credit option that's available in SPS, also off-peak alternative use rider air conditioning programs, and also, an interesting one is the Southwest Power Pool Integrated Marketplace. All of these different types of demand response programs have their own unique characteristics and assumptions that are based upon when they can be utilized. An interesting thing that I just like to bring back to for the resource side is that demand response programs can really fill in that same space of like 4-hour storage. So a lot of times in different ELCC studies, you can see that those types of resources or demand side resources, demand response resources, and batteries are filling in that same kind of niche, so they can potentially impact ELCC accreditation for each. Inside of Southwest Power Pool, and Jared may talk a little bit more about this, but their demand response is currently going through a lot of review about how it's going to actually be incorporated into a resource adequacy workbook submittal. Today, the demand response really is just a load modification. We modify our peak demand of our load forecast to take into account the demand response, and we submit the load forecast. That's how that's done today. In the future, there is going to be that same opportunity as a load modifier, but also a potential for resource accreditation, just like you would accrediting a resource for wind or solar, battery, or anything like that. So there will be multiple options, but there are some changes to the RA construct from what is today currently a forward-looking planning requirement to a more post-season analysis. And so load modifying resources that are not accredited as demand response will only be able to be, you can only count what is actually utilized to reduce a peak demand. So it won't have the potential for modifying your load forecast. You will only be able to count demand response that is actually used, not necessarily what is projected to be used, which is a pretty big distinction. But I think it's an important component to remember. All right, next slide. So forecasting participation. You can see that right now we're in 2025. That's kind of where our expected participation is taking a dramatic shift upwards. By 27, we're expecting about 350 megawatts of demand response. Our current studies from demand response shows that our system currently can handle about or can find value in about 350 megawatts of demand response. So today, anything over 350 megawatts is not really able to be effectively utilized to be able to manage our peak demand. Part of that is a function of our relatively flat demand that we see on a daily basis, which John was describing a little bit earlier. So the shape of your load, your peaks and your valleys of your load on both a daily basis and yearly, those are all components that can really determine the effectiveness of demand response for any one specific utility. So let's go to the next one. I think that might have been it. So questions.
Yeah, let's take any questions that people have of Justin for this next part of the discussion before we turn it over to Jared. Both online or in the room, any questions you have?
We do have one that's kind of going back to John's presentation. If I could, why don't you come up here? This is a chat that came in, I think, reflecting on John's presentation on load forecasting. I very much appreciate your modeling and how you are being used in your and how they are being used in your projections for demand. The fact that you are tying them to populations. It would be useful to see these demands regionally and breaking Albuquerque out separately. If we could maybe have you come up so she can hear. So I thank you, Representative Borrego. If I garbled that, please feel free to come on and ask it for yourself.
Right, verify. Yeah.
Well, yes, Albuquerque is not in our service territory. But do you want a more detailed explanation of our service territory? Yeah. Yep. Okay. So just to take a step back on the service territory of SPS, Texas Panhandle, Northern Panhandle, the Southern Panhandle, Lubbock, Levelland, that part of Texas. And then in the southeast New Mexico, we have mostly in Lee and Roosevelt counties. Go ahead. Yes. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, so just wanted to fill in a little bit more on that. Back on the GridWorks webpage from the first workshop, there are some slides that outline the SPS service territory, both in Texas and New Mexico. As Justin Gable was alluding to, our service territory in Texas is really the Panhandle, so Amarillo up into the Oklahoma Panhandle area. Then we travel south. We don't serve the city of Lubbock, but we serve the surrounding areas down to the Denver City and Seminole, Texas areas. And then over in New Mexico, we're really along the east side of the state, really spanning from the Tucumcari area down into the Clovis, Portales, obviously Roswell, where we are today, and then down into Lee and Eddy counties, Carlsbad, Hobbs, all the way down to where New Mexico and Texas intersect on the south side of the state. So we don't span into some of those larger residential population areas like you see like in Albuquerque or Santa Fe. And as I said before, we don't serve the city of Lubbock either. That's actually now an ERCOT entity. So a little bit of background on our service territory, but I think, John, is there something for you to add? Anything additional?
Yeah, I mean, just that we
specifically around the modeling?
So we do, I was covering the system level sales and peak demand in my forecast, or in my presentation, but we do forecast both by state and by class. So if you think about population growth and kind of general business growth, those would typically be residential and small commercial forecasts. So those will be broken out when we present the forecast for the IRP. So you can see the growth that's kind of just due to underlying, economic growth and population growth. That tends not to be the biggest driver of our load growth, which is why I focus on the large loads, which are really kind of outpacing and driving the growth on the system.
And I think there was one more question about the capacity of demand response currently in your system, Justin.
Kara,
Kara, you want to restate it?
Actually, that was the question I had. How does SPS characterize demand response? Is it a resource? And if so, do you discuss it as capacity, or is there some other way that you describe it?
Yes, so demand response today, we are seeing around 70 megawatts of demand response, maybe a little bit more than that. That's a function of customer participation or willingness to participate. We are projecting more participation in the future, up to around 350 megawatts of participation. That is not currently subscribed right now. Like I said, it's a function of participation or willingness to participate by customers. Right now, it's considered a load modifier. So it's more on the load side as a reduction, not necessarily as a resource. But we have taken an effort to make sure that future programs are designed to be able to meet resource accreditation methodology and SPP. That's the SPP integrated market demand response program that we saw on the screen earlier. So we are taking efforts to move to a resource kind of view of that, but there will always be at least some portion that would be considered load modifying on the load side.
Thank you. You answered my questions. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Lynch.
Thank you. I think we're ready to have Jared Cooley continue the conversation here, and then we'll have another segment for questions and answers.
All right, thank you, Margie. As you're pulling up the slides, I do want to circle back on the question a few minutes ago from Senator Scott and the questions around delayed loads within the SPS service territory. So I wanted to highlight a little bit that the CCNs that we have currently in front of our commissions in both Texas and New Mexico currently will help alleviate some of those delays, allowing a path forward for the approved loads to start to come online as the generation, as well as some of the transmission solutions that we have currently underway within the service territory are put in place. And so we've obviously viewed those CCNs that we've put in front of the commissions to be vitally important to us to help address the delayed load. But I do want to highlight that there is still a significant amount of load requests that are pending in the service territory. And Dr. Goodenough's slides, I believe there was some very tall figures that had some blue that are currently on solution loads or loads that we're not currently baking into our forecast. But these are type of requests that customers are asking for or alluding to in our service territory. And so the CCNs that we have going forward right now, the RFP that we currently are working through in 2025, that will result very likely in an additional generation CCNs later this year. All of that starts to continue the process of unlocking load and moving that forward in conjunction with the transmission solutions that are in place. A lot of our challenges that we're facing are not only addressing the localized transmission issues, but it's also the generation aspect. And so it's definitely a different view from what we've historically had, which is very much more constrained on local transmission or distribution resources but we have this underlying resource challenge that has really delayed our abilities to execute on loads. I will say that we are still engaged with the Southwest Power Pool, and I'm going to talk broadly about the Southwest Power Pool in a moment, with some modifications to their tariffs and planning practices to hopefully also unlock some of the load studies to continue to at least identify what is needed to serve the load so we can provide those paths forward for customers and reasonable timelines for integration. And then the last thing I just want to add is there's also the microgrid concept that was approved last year in New Mexico. That is also a tool that we're looking to utilize to allow customers to move forward as a bridge concept. All right. So Southwest Power Pool. SPS is unique from the situation of the large utilities in New Mexico and the fact that we are part of a regional transmission operator. The Southwest Power Pool spans all the way from Canada through the center part of the United States, all the way down into the SPS service territory. We covered this a little bit in workshop 1. If you want to go back to that one, you can see some maps of what the Southwest Power Pool service territory looks like and where SPS really fits in, which is right at the bottom left corner of that service territory. And so we participate very actively in the Southwest Power Pool. It's very important that we're able to help drive policies that can help support the needs within our region. But stepping back a little bit on exactly what we're working at the Southwest Power Pool on a wide variety of topics is I want to highlight some of the big things that are happening in the industry. And the first one is around the FERC NOPR around integrated of large loads and interstate transmission systems. So this is the concept that I know we're getting a lot of questions about large loads, including data centers. You know, FERC and the Department of Energy are even having these discussions as well, doing outreaches with stakeholders across the country, pushing rulemakings around how should this look, how should utilities interact, how should commissions interact, how should regional transmission operators interact, where does FERC fit into that conversation, where does the Department of Energy fit into that discussion. So this is a really important topic, and so I just wanted to make sure we're highlighting that these issues and the issues within the SPS area are not just for SPS. This is a nationwide issue. The SPS is just a part of that entire picture. But also to take a step back, data centers are not the only large load in our area compared to other parts of the United States. We do have a significant amount of oil and gas, more traditional loads within our territories that we have to make sure we manage. The problem is that some of these large load rulemakings are really overlapping the two different types of loads due to creating thresholds of just a megawatt type. And so it's just something that we need to continue to navigate and work with our stakeholders on. Prior to FERC actually rolling out this notice of rulemaking around large loads, the Southwest Power Pool actually created their own large load called the High Impact Large Load HILLS concept. And so in the last year, Southwest Power Pool has rolled out, either formally approved or still working on a number of efforts really focused around how to study large loads or how to build generation to support the rapid load growth in the service territory. And so the second bullet, I highlight a number of them. HILLS, high impact large loads, which creates a study process around how to study loads 50 megawatts and above. HILGA, high impact large load generation agreement, how to bring a generation solution and a large load together. ERA's expedited resource adequacy study. This was a one-time shot at identifying new generation on a fast track process to help with that really fast load ramp that we're being seen across the service territories of the Southwest Power Pool. Priority process. This is an idea that the Southwest Power Pool said, hey, we have a bunch of interconnections of generation already on the system. Is it possible to just to add 20% more to that point of interconnection? Is that valuable? Is that useful? How quickly can that be done? And so that's actually a process, again, as a bridge concept that Southwest Power Pool rolled out. CHILLS and PALS, those two are still in development. These are really focused around interruptible loads So high impact large loads is really focused on data centers or oil and gas or manufacturing locations. So high load factor loads that don't want to be interrupted. They want to be connected with firm service as much as they can. Chills and PALs, those are more focused in on a interruptible type concept that reduces the impact on system peak, or when there are issues on the transmission system, these are the first loads off. And so this is not the most desirable for many types of loads, but there are some load types that are looking to utilize this or utilize it in partnership with other concepts. And so these are concepts that have really risen in the last 18 months, last year and a half, around how to solve this fast growing load issue. Now, I'll be honest, SPS has been really on the forefront of these loads. We've been seeing these loads since 22 or even before that coming in. Now, the rest of the region is now starting to see them, and now everybody's asking for solutions. And so some of these are short-term, some of these are long-term concepts, but it is definitely front and center with a number of stakeholders and the commissions within the Southwest Power Pool. The third bullet here is 765 kV transmission overlay. So this is something that SPP has rolled out back in 2024 as part of their annual integrated transmission planning study process. They put the first ever 765 kV line in SPP within the SPS service territory, running from the Amarillo area down into southeast New Mexico. And so that line is currently being worked on with an in-service date of May of 2030. Since then, Southwest Power Pool has approved 3 more 765 kV transmission lines, one additional one in the SPS service territory called Crawfish Draw to Phantom, but then 2 other 765 kV lines on the eastern part of the footprint in the Oklahoma and Louisiana parts of the service territory. That was 2024 and 2025. By October of 2026, the Southwest Power Pool is expecting to do an entire system overlay of 765 kV and identifying that proposal running all the way from the Oklahoma area all the way up into North Dakota. The expectation is that that'll be a study that's performed by SPP. They're being pushed to look at different iterations and variations, maybe not just all 765, but how can we put some 345 kV in there? How is it cost effective? How does it make the most sense? Where is it? What type of loads are being served? Does this make the right long-term plan? But that is the goal this year. The Southwest Power Pool Board of Directors has really put that out there and pushed that they don't want to see these one-off 765 kV solutions in certain areas. They want to make sure we're seeing what is the full holistic picture of 765 kV in the region. And we're seeing this not just in SPP, but we have seen it in ERCOT has rolled out massive 765 kV concepts. MISO to the east of Southwest Power Pool has a number of 765 kV lines. And then all the way over in the PJM area for sure, they've also been doing 765 kV. I'm not as familiar to some of the activities in the West as much since it doesn't really fall underneath RTO governance, but it definitely is a national push across a number of regions to build a pretty significant amount of 765, and the Southwest Power Pool is participating in that. SPS will benefit from additional 765 kV lines as they will interconnect to the 2 that have already been approved in our service territory, allowing more energy transfers from the rest of the Southwest Power Pool region into our area and increase our tie lines between SPS and the rest of SPP. And actually, I do have a slide on that, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And the last thing I really want to hit on is the consolidated planning process. This is a new process that was just approved by FERC just 2 weeks ago, I believe, to create a new generator interconnection process that goes hand in hand with load interconnection and reliability studies. This is the first of its kind in the nation definitely from an RTO perspective. I don't know of any local balancing authority areas that do this, but what will happen is that generators, instead of entering into a separate study structure like they have today with the DICES, they'll be entering into the same study as the reliability analysis. And the new generation will be studied with the reliability issues, and costs will then be spread across generation and loads. And the goal is to streamline the study process, to have the generation interconnection studies performed in a year and a half versus some of the 4-5 year lead times we've been seeing on generation interconnection studies. Also, to drive more holistic planning between generation and reliability and economic modeling, because they're being done in the same study. You're not identifying possibly two different solutions in two different paths with two different variables. You're looking at the variables hand in hand, and you're identifying the best transmission to solve the needs. And so we've been a big supporter of this. SPS is very active in the development of the consolidated planning process. It's been approved now, and now we have to figure out how to actually make it work. But this is something that's going to start transitioning in 2026, but really start to get going in 2027. The last thing I have on here is just cost allocation review. With the amount of 765 kV transmission being developed in the SPP service territory, a lot of the states and other stakeholders are concerned about how are costs being allocated across the region. Are they being properly allocated to the right regions? Are some regions paying more than they should from the value they're getting? So one, that's kind of the reason why SPP is really pushing for that full overlay issue. So people are not looking at the solutions in isolation on one-offs. They're going to be able to look at what is the full picture of the impact of 765 kV on the entire region. But there is the conversation now. Should some of these larger loads pay a higher portion? Should certain areas that are seeing these larger loads migrate in their areas pay more? Or should costs be allocated not just on a peak value, but maybe on an energy value or a benefit value? And so this is a very active discussion within the Southwest Power Pool. There's hope that there's going to be at least some high-level recommendations by October, November of 2026. I talked a little bit about high impact large loads. I think I'm going to skip over this a little bit. This is pulled directly from the Southwest Power Pool. What is a high impact large load? As I talked about, it's at 69 kV and below. It's 10 megawatt load connecting to the transmission system. At greater than 69 kV, so typical 100 kV or 230 kV or even 345 kV voltages for interconnection, it's 50 megawatts and above. And the high impact large load adds some new requirements, one, to the study process, but also to how is it actually connected to the grid? What are we on the transmission owner side required to provide at that point of interconnection? But also what type of information does the customer have to also provide? Talked about these a bit. So this is a little bit more on chills and pals. As I said before, chills and pals are still in development. Chills actually has been approved by the Southwest Power Pool Board of Directors, but is pending at FERC. And this PALS, price adaptive load, is still in development stage. Want to talk, so this is a little bit more on the consolidated planning process that I talked about. It was approved March 13th. I just want to hit on the benefits of it. Reduce GIQs, improve load interconnection and transmission service studies, streamline planning, greater cost certainty to GI developers, and improve cost sharing between generation and load. The second to last bullet I didn't cover before is in greater cost certainty to GI developers. This is really important because when we talk about how Justin Gable and his team is reviewing projects that go into the RFPs, one of the key items is for new generators that are looking to go through the RFP and interconnect to the SPS system, they have to go through the Southwest Power Pool DICES study. And the DICES study is for all greenfield generation interconnection requests, whether it's wind, solar, batteries, thermal units. If you want to be a new interconnection point on the system, you have to go through the DICES. The problem with the DICES is that when you look at the DICES, which is currently divided into 3 phases, the price of the network upgrades assigned to a generator swings dramatically between each stage of the study. And then when we start to add in restudies, you start to see the studies cost swing 4, 5, 6 different times. And it leads to a lot of uncertainty from the developer side. They don't know how much the network upgrades are going to be when they get to the end. And the further along the study you go, the more financial security you have to put up, which then is a larger cost to the developer and more risk for them. And what we see is a lot of generators start to drop out. We have DICE studies that have started at 100, 200 generators in the queue in that cluster. And at the end, there's 5 or 6 who actually make it through. That's not really working for the region when we need to have generation coming online to help serve the new loads. And so that's why the Southwest Power Pool had created concepts like ARIS and priority processing in order to create some new fast track processes to increase capacity. But that's why there's this push to the CPP. And what the CPP will provide is you're going to be given an entry fee when you enter into the study. And that entry fee is going to be kind of locking you in at a cost. The cost is going to be actually, it will be higher than if you waited out the queue and you went up all the ups and downs and you got to the end and everybody had dropped out and you're stuck with, the minimal network upgrades of maybe a 115 kV line rebuild. But it's going to be higher. It's going to cost more than that because you're going to get rolled in with a number of other transmission projects. But what it does is provide, when you enter in the study, you know how much it's going to cost when you get to the end. And that is very valuable to developers, it's very valuable to the utilities that will have a lot more cost certainty and consistency on when a generator enters into the queue, it's going to make it all the way through and we can count on it as being a viable generator at the end. And so, again, this is brand new, just approved 2 weeks ago. It's going to take a little while before it gets stood up, but definitely see a long-term value here on definitely faster time to market for generators getting built and approved within the Southwest Power Pool than what we've historically seen. And transmission. So I clicked too much. Transmission. I just want to hit on this quick. I think we're at time. This highlights the new transmission lines in the SPS service territory since 2024. And so the Southwest Power Pool performs an integrated transmission planning study called the ITP annually, and they do reliability and economic analysis. Out of this, SPS, because of the amount of load growth in our region, we've had a number of new transmission approved. Potter to Beckham 345, that's that red line running east to west, was identified. That project was actually competitively bid out, and SPS, in a partnership with TransSource, was awarded that project. So we're currently working through the CCN development and routing activities right now. Potter Crossroads Phantom 765 kV line. That's the green line on the left side of the map running north to south. That was identified out of the 2024 ITP. That was the first ever 765 kV line in the Southwest Power Pool. That one is currently being worked on. We're nearing our first CCN filings in Texas for that corridor. Crawfish Draw to Phantom 765 kV line. This project was just awarded to SPS in February. It's on the bottom right, going down in southeast New Mexico. That's, again, an additional 765 kV line that SPS is currently working on. And then Crawfish Draw to Woodward, 765 kV. That's the leg going north out of there, going up into Woodward, Oklahoma. That project will be competitively bid. Expected that will go out for an RFP sometime this summer or early fall. So these are projects in the SPS service territory. Not every project in our footprint we get to build. If we think back a few years and Crossroads Hobbs Roadrunner, a double circuit 345 kV line that's hopefully going in service by this summer. That project was put out for competitive bid and actually is being built by NextEra currently. SPS was successful in the Potter to Beckham 345 kV line, and we'll see what happens out of Woodward to Crawfish Draw. But regardless of who actually builds the line, the line does bring significant value to loads and customers in the SPS area. It will provide another corridor for moving energy into our area, providing reliability and economic benefits. And I think that's where I will end.
There may be questions about what Jared has just presented. So let's take some few minutes for questions, both online or in the room. Raise your hands and we'll address questions. I'm not seeing any in the room. Kathy, you seeing any on Zoom?
For break.
Okay.
All right.
Please.
So in the CCN proceeding that is wrapped up and we're making a decision, a lot of the conversation centered around how SPP really limits SPS's ability to plan generation for a few reasons. And I was wondering if you might want to talk, since we're in the new IRP, if you might want to talk about how SPP restricts what SPS can do.
So the question in the room was, how does SPP how does SPS view how SPP restricts our ability to add generation? And so the current rules that are in place today is you can either do replacement generation, which is a retiring unit and you replace it, say megawatts at the same location. You can do surplus, which is adding more generation at the same point of interconnection. And that's really more geared toward energy or kind of balancing that accreditation of the two different units to maximize capacity at that location. Or you have to go through that DICES process, as I talked about before. And we think about the DICE. So we definitely have seen a significant value with replacement and surplus in the last two CCNs. I think a majority of our portfolios have been replacement and surplus because of these challenges we see with the DICES process and very few generators actually making it through the queues. When we think about the DICES, we can see that, for example, Gaines County, which is in part of the CCNs right now, that was a 2020 generator submittal, and it finally got a GIA this fall. So it took over 5 years to get to that point where we could actually call it a real project and have all the processes from the Southwest Power Pool verified. Now, when you ask the question, where are we going forward in this IRP? And the answer is going to be that CPP process. And I don't know yet how we're going to structure a future RFP around this, but there's going to be a portion of that because there's going to be a lot more we're going to be locked in a lot more on what is that cost of that generator going to be with that grid C. It's called grid C, but the grid connection cost, that entry level, that entry fee cost, that's going to provide us a lot of guidance, I think, as a range of how much generation is going to cost for the transmission network upgrade component. And then we can factor that into the modeling. And also there's going to be the timeline. They're hoping to have those studies done in 12 to maybe 16 months. And so we'll have a lot more ability to take projects that are more recently being developed, enter them into the study, and get them out at the end. So maybe there's a proactive component of maybe studying projects that haven't gone into CPP, or at least there's going to be a component of projects that are currently in the CPP will have a quicker ISD. And the value with those, though, is that they're greenfield. Greenfields means that we can then in the future put surplus there. At some point, we will run out of generators on our system to either do surplus or replacement at. And you need to have new greenfield in order to drive more capacity. And right now, the real value is the CPP. SPP has the ARIS process was a one-time study. Priority processing is a one-time process. That's going to be sunset, I think, by July of 2026. And so after that, it's really going to be on CPP and its utilization. Do you have anything to add to that, Justin?
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't give you my phone.
Yeah. Everything that Jared said, of course. There is one thing though that I think that is important to understand, like a difference between the IRP process and the RFP process. Obviously, an RFP is in response to the findings of an IRP. When we are in an IRP, though, we do generally add what we call transmission adders to greenfield projects. So if we have a wind project or a solar project that is a greenfield, we'll have a transmission adder, which is like $1 per kW value to represent transmission network upgrade cost. However, the inputs that we're providing the model are not necessarily assuming what is actually in the DISIS. So in an IRP, we may see a build out of resources, a portfolio of resources of wind, solar, and batteries that are just not in the DISIS queue. And so there can be variations in what we assume the generic resource build out on a perfect world of what the IRP would say, you need this as your portfolio of resources. Well, that portfolio of resources may not be available in the DISIS queue. So in the RFP, that's a transition from a generic modeling activity to an actual resource selection. You were limited to not generic resources with an infinite volume of supply, with or without transmission adders, representing a replacement or a surplus study not having a transmission adder. So that pool of resources from the DISIS becomes the maximum bidding pool. And that's not necessarily guaranteed that all projects in the DISIS, especially in Group 5, which is the SPS service territory, will even bid into the RFP. It's very possible that there are projects in the SPS territory that would not bid into our RFP. So it becomes a much more narrower and narrower process, or pool of resources to be selected from that may not necessarily align with what the IRP would assume is your best or maximal benefit of resource selections. So just thought it was an important point to maybe add.
Go ahead.
So yes, and then have it also SPP also limit which resources you can select.
I don't know that they are.
Repeat the question, please.
So the question is, assuming all that information, how is SPP specifically limiting resource selection for SPS? I would say that SPP in themselves is not necessarily dictating that you can only develop these resources, but we utilize the DISIS in the last RFPs as a way to say the transmission network upgrade costs are associated. So they have a firm bid price, and they also have an assumed expectation of being able to meet their COD date or their commercial operation date. If we did not have those requirements related to the DISIS, it would be a project that's being selected with unknown final pricing information and also an unknown expectation of them actually be able to meet their commercial operation date. So SPP is not saying, SPS, you cannot build these other resources. It's just a function of projects that are provided into the DISIS queue. That is the ultimate filter.
So Adam, SPP and their accreditation results how you look to output your models.
Yes. So the SPP does provide resource or assumptions on resource accreditation for general technology types. Those accreditation values, so although you may have a certain nameplate of different resources available from the DISIS and ultimately bid into the RFP, your accredited capacity will never be more than the nameplate. And based upon the types of resources that are available, you may just not physically have enough resources to be able to meet that accredited capacity value. However, that's not necessarily the only thing that our model is selecting on. Our model is also, it's a least cost optimization. So it's trying to find the perfect amount of resources to be able to meet all of your system requirements. And that's both meeting your PRM requirements. It's both, and it's in addition, meeting the hourly obligation for every year of the model. So that's what we call EUE, expected unserved energy. So reducing the amount of EUE that the model produces with resource selections. There's also resources that can be selected just because they provide cost benefits over existing resources on the system. So if you have a sufficiently low-priced enough project that could offset more expensive resources on the system, you might select resources. So just meeting the PRM of the portfolio, you may end up selecting resources that are above the PRM value that would ultimately put you more over the PRM value because it represents cost effectiveness of the portfolio. Thank you so much for the questions.
Thank you. We're going to give you a chance to get some refreshment here because I think that's been a very thick and intense conversation so far this afternoon. But before we invite you over to refreshment, we do have just a little request for you. And so Deb has put around the room a QR code. What you see here, and let's share this slide. During the first workshop, we asked what you were interested in this process. And what we've done is taken the collection of offerings from stakeholders onto this slide, and you now have a multiple choice question set in the QR code survey that's on this slide and on your table, and on the Zoom you have access to this as Zoom participants. We'd like for you to go through this list of things that were identified in the first workshop as interests and prioritize your top 3. We're going to ask the SPS and Excel folks to refrain from responding to this survey, please. We'd like to hear from the stakeholders. And once you've completed the survey, we invite you to some refreshment, and we'll reconvene at 3:30 in our first roundtable discussion. So please fill out your survey and then have some refreshment, use the restroom, and we'll reconvene at 3:30 Mountain Time. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's.
So welcome back to everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully our Zoom participants are back as well. Can we tell they're online? We had two great roundtable conversations, and this is not the first, maybe the first, but it's not the last conversation about the topics that you all explore this afternoon. As I mentioned, what we've accomplished today is hopefully stakeholders have greater information about the SPS system, opportunities, challenges. This is all creating this foundation of knowledge that will help us inform the 20-year plan. We'll tally the results of the QR code survey that you responded to and report on that tomorrow to kind of describe what the focus of the majority of stakeholders is so that we can design that in. And at least, I don't know if Jared or Linda or Travis, do you want to offer a few comments about what you heard from your roundtable conversation on load forecasting? And then we'll have Kathy give a few comments on what the conversation was on resources, both supply and demand sides. So any observations from the SPS team on the roundtable conversation about load? John? Travis, Jared, anybody want to offer what you heard? Of course, the Zoom folks will have a chance to talk about this tomorrow too, but you go, Travis.
We covered a lot of stuff. I don't. What am I planning?
Three or four bullets.
Just, yeah, your insights from the conversation from stakeholders.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we spent a lot of time talking about what's that? Oh, yes. So that's fair. I guess you haven't seen me yet. I'm Travis Whalen, the manager of load forecasting for Excel. Yeah, so we spent a lot of time talking about what were sort of the fundamental changes that necessitated the shift in the forecast, that sort of step change that we saw from the old probabilistic models to the ones that include the more near-term jumps, as well as what sort of drives the constraints and what supports the use of those constraints in our forecasting. And I think in general, there's a need to understand, like, is that load real? Do we feel confident that we can actually see that scale of growth? And I think a large part of that was just kind of reinforcing that we already really have. We've seen a massive jump in the scale of requests, in the scale of growth that we've already seen. We only expect that to continue. Beyond that, we got into, I'm taking out all the notes.
Oh, here, you want to see? Here. They're in front of you. Come on around.
All right.
Speak up. Here's some of the things that were.
So what else did we talk about? So we talked about the sort of the nature of oil and gas loads as opposed to data center loads, whether or not one of those is more fundamentally sound to include versus the other. And to a certain extent, I think there's risks associated with both of them. And it's important to not necessarily characterize them as, strong, a strong industry or not a strong industry, but just to understand what are the risks associated with each of these industries and how do they require us to change our forecasting processes depending on which one we're talking about, and the timelines of those different risks. And then what else we got? I think, anybody else have any immediate thoughts? Then we talked, let's see. Yes, and then there was the sort of sidebar discussion about whether or not we should be bringing in microgrids. So we'll kind of preface this in this conversation as it's something that will not very necessarily be incorporated into the IRP, but is a sort of interesting topic that we've been wanting to talk more and more about as we've started to kind of build out these programs to help accommodate customers that want to prepare themselves to get grid connected. How do we then incorporate that into our load forecasting and into our resource planning process. It's something that and a handful of other policies that we're starting to adopt, or that we're starting to look into. There are these changes in methodology that are sort of on the horizon that we have not actually incorporated yet, but we want to start getting input from stakeholders now about whether or not whether we should incorporate them, how we should incorporate them, and what would be the best timing to do so.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Travis. Kathy, Kathy's doing it. I wonder if SPS wants. So Justin or any of the folks who are in the resource options group. I'm happy to summarize. I have the notes on my laptop just to make it extra challenging for you. But here, I can put this. So there's two slides. These two.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right, so in our resource conversation, we heard back from folks a few different things. A couple things I thought were kind of important is understanding the New Mexico compliance with the 2045 regulations. 2045 being the carbon zero requirement, and the transition from a REC requirement in 2030 and 2040, and then conversion to the carbon free in 2045, and how that can influence resource selection and timing of different types of technologies. We had some conversation about what is available today and what future types of resources need to be developed to be able to meet those in the future. I suggested the IRP is really like that first talking point for understanding what is possible and what is cost effective through 2045. That's our discussion point with stakeholders, both customers, SPS, regulators, representatives of the community. The IRP is our tool for being able to communicate how those requirements affect resource selections. So we also discussed a little bit about the current CCN and how impactful that could potentially be to this IRP process, where those ultimate approvals go. We talked a little bit about batteries a little bit. What our current projected increases are going to be for that technology with the CCN. So that was an important component. Also, we had some conversations a little bit about virtual power plants and SPS's potential for modeling those. As a part of that conversation and demand response in general, we had a conversation about what is the load duration curve for SPS. So something we'll ultimately be providing back as like a deliverable is what our projected load duration curve is with the latest forecast, and what is demand response's ability to mitigate the peak during those periods. Something that we'll look to be able to provide in the future. Let's see. Other things that I thought were interesting is, a lot geared around the 2045. I did make a point to talk about how we did our last CCN, where we modeled our system-wide needs on a least cost to be able to meet all of customer needs across our Texas and New Mexico jurisdictions. After we did that, we layered in the RPS requirements based upon what was remaining to be solution for RPS and REC generation. So, for instance, we solve a system-wide need to be able to meet our requirements for planning reserve margin and also for unserved energy, things like that. And then once we have those, solving for the incremental need for RPS compliance and REC generation. That I think is a good framework for how we can move forward with modeling, and making sure that those requirements are modeled appropriately for New Mexico so that they get to take advantage fully of RECs that are associated with resources to meet those requirements. I think that's a really important component. Also, just general conversion of thermal resources that might extend past 2045, or emerging technology, timing availability for those types of technologies. things like that. So we also had a note about grade enhancing technologies, something that we'll probably revisit in the future once we have some more thoughts on that. So, yeah. Yeah, I think so. So I'm a talker.
No, it's great. So we'll build on this tomorrow. You'll each have an opportunity to engage in the resource conversation if you didn't today, as well as the requirement policy and SPP requirements. So those are the 3 roundtable discussions. Tomorrow we invite you back here for continental breakfast at 8 a.m. and we'll resume our roundtable conversations starting at 8:30. We'll have a few administrative announcements and maybe a few questions that came up today that we'll want to address. We'll share with you the priority interests that you all surveyed today so that we can let you know where that focus will be. And a great feature from tomorrow, we have Linda Hudgens will talk a little bit about the information sharing process that will run through this workshop series as we go forward and how you can get access not just to the presentations of these workshops, but through a shared file system in case you want to dig into more details. It's evolving right now, but Linda will describe how that process is going to work. And we'll review the next steps in preparation for workshop number 3 when we meet tomorrow. So I think we're off to a great start, good conversations, and much more to follow. So before we close, I think I'd like to ask Zoe Leese if she would offer her reflections from the day.
Thanks, Margie. First of all, thank you to everyone here in the room and there on Zoom for joining us on the first day of this 2-day workshop. Because I attended the load forecasting roundtable, I think that's most on my mind right now. So I'll kind of use that as an example for the comments I'm going to make today. But we discussed the load forecast that John and Travis presented earlier today, and really looking at in the next decade a doubling of SPS's system. And as they mentioned, they are developing the 2026 forecast that will go into this IRP today. So what does that underscore for us? It underscores the importance of this stakeholder engagement process at this moment in time. It is important that we hear what your concerns are, that we are able to answer your questions, that we are able to have conversations about the big issues that this planning process is going to be addressing. So just going with the load forecast as an example, we need to hear from you feedback on what you want us to be considering when we are developing this modeling, when we are developing the forecast, when we are modeling different scenarios in the IRP. Getting that feedback now, addressing it now, incorporating it into our processes in this IRP now is much easier and I think much more productive than at the litigated phase of a CCN. So I just want to take this opportunity to say just how very important and valuable the process is and how very important and valuable it is to hear your feedback, to have these conversations, to answer your questions, and to take feedback back to the company so that we can start thinking about how to incorporate that into this process. So really, thank you so much for joining us today, for engaging in these conversations, for raising your hand when you don't maybe understand something or need more explanation or have a concern that you want us to discuss. This is the process and it's so important. So very big thank you to everyone joining us, whether in person or virtual. It is really wonderful to see folks in person, by the way, because this is important and it is a consequential IRP. Our last IRP was consequential as well, but just nationally right now, we are seeing so much growth. We are seeing so much technological innovation, and these conversations are really important. And so thank you to GridWorks for facilitating these really important, crucial conversations in our integrated resource planning. And also thank you to the New Mexico Military Institute for hosting us today as well. I just want to end with that. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow. There's those on Zoom who are asking about the poll. We will put the QR code back up right now while we're completing because we had very few responses, but I know the people in the room here did theirs. So we're going to encourage our Zoom participants, stakeholders, please respond to the poll. And so we'll put that back up as we're closing, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you. Mm-hmm.